Hello and welcome to Reiki Women Podcasts. My name is Carrie Varela and I'm joined here today with Michaela Daystar and Bronwen Logan. And today we're going to be discussing what I think is a very interesting and timely topic. The time of our recording is March 2022, and it marks the 100th year of Reiki, of Usui Reiki. And so now on the precipice of another 100 years of Reiki, I think it's a really important time to be mindful and look towards the development of Reiki over the last 100 years. And then also kind of extrapolate that out into the future and visualize the future growth of Reiki as a practice, both for practitioners and people who are receiving Reiki as a practice, and for our own development as Reiki practitioners. So today our topic is about what forms of support we felt were most helpful to us on our journey as Reiki practitioners, and use that as a really timely container to look at the 100 years of Reiki and talk about our own progress as Reiki practitioners, and share some of our stories, but also be mindful of the future of Reiki and how it might look for other practitioners out there. So Michaela, would you like to start about your development of your Reiki practice and what forms of support have been most meaningful to you?
Yeah, I love this topic and the connection with this moment where we're kind of turning over into this next centennial in the history of Reiki. And so in this moment, I think back to, what are the forms of support that Usui might have had, and how does that relate to today? And for me, it kind of comes in three separate but interrelated categories. One is, what are the spiritual supports that we each have that he would have had? What are the cultural supports, the kind of cultural societal contexts that support a body of work, being developed and coming out into the world? And then what are the personal supports, right, in our individual life? And so, I don't know the answers to those questions for Usui, but at least on the cultural level, I know that he was supported by, centuries, in some case, thousands of years, and others of tradition. The Shinto practices and the esoteric Buddhist practices that are the foundation for the system that he developed would have been a tremendous support in his personal life and in the development of Reiki. And so, for me, I've really cultivated those forms of support as well, as much as I can as an American woman. And it's been incredibly nourishing to learn more about the cultural, spiritual, historic roots of Reiki, and then to lay that alongside my own. And so I've just found so much support and so much joy in finding the commonalities between, for example, the nature-based Shinto lineage and the nature-based Celtic lineage. That's my own, the lineage that I'm descended from. Finding those points of reference, those points of intersection, the places where those traditions are different, but also extremely complementary, just feels very supportive to me in my practice. And it's become a really important lens through which I teach and share the system of Reiki, as well as my own personal practice. So that's kind of where I wanted to start, in this kind of initial part of this conversation. Is like, what's the context of support that we build a practice inside of? What does the culture provide to us? What does our own lineage provide to us? And laying that alongside the lineages that we've taken up as Reiki practitioners. So I'll just start there, and then maybe circle back to the question of personal support in a moment.
Yeah, I really like that, Michaela. That's really beautiful. That idea of having these, just looking at the different canisters that we put ourselves, we could put ourselves into to look at that through. So if I were to look at that, spiritual, cultural, and personal, thinking about cultural, I guess, as you were, it's interesting, isn't it, that I think there's been a lot of change in our society, especially since even when I began the system of Reiki to what's happening today. So if I look at when I first started, when I first started I was in Asia. But then when I came to Australia, there wasn't a lot happening here as far as Reiki went, but what was here was sort of done in the guise of like a secret thing. So culturally, it was this thing that we couldn't know about, and we could only learn it had a whole lot of mysticism about it, and which of course is attractive, in many ways, because it's like, oh, I want to find out about that, sort of feeling, but it doesn't give much of a sense of where do we find the truths, when we talk about that. And because it is held then by a teacher or whatever, and that that's sort of contained and controlled, and the students are very much at the whim of the teacher. So culturally, I think I sort of rebelled against that actually initially, and really wanted people to talk about what the system of Reiki was. And that was, luckily, it was when the internet was just starting off, in the early 2000s. Yeah. And, of course it had been around longer, but, just that everyone was really starting to get into connecting through the internet. And that thing of being able to connect and talk to other people was a great support in developing my own personal practice and what I wanted to teach, and as well, so being able to talk to people and not having this sort of thing of like, oh no, that's unspeakable, that's a mystery. And so getting out there, finding out about things, going to Japan, finding out about things, really getting into the grit of it, and having a sense of a full system with a whole history. And I know what you were talking about, Carrie, that it's 100 years. I mean, even, that is obviously a debatable fact. I know it's nice. I do agree that it's nice to put it into, it's a nice framing, and it's a nice framing for people to feel like, oh, I'm practicing something that has been around since blah, blah. Yep. But we do know that, Usui was practicing prior to 1922, but we don't really know what, I mean, look, there's a lot of hearsay about that, what he was practicing and how he was practicing. But we know that it was formalized around 1922. So that, I guess, is a good indicator for us to say 100 years, looking back, how far have we come, where have we come from, and hopefully, where we will be going to.
Bronwen, it makes so much sense coming from that rebelling against the secrecy that you went on to write books, sharing that history and that lineage, and inspiring this podcast where we're sharing, talking about it. I love that.
Yeah. We're also grateful that we can kind of step out of the closet, the Reiki closet, and into the light, and really start to piece together what Reiki really is, and have meaningful discussions, and share it not just within our own personal journey, but with each other, and have that shared cultural context with which to explore the practice of Reiki with each other.
And I think a lot of people have, taken that obviously further today. I know, Carrie, you were talking about who was Justin Stein the other day. And, there's a lot of people who have gone into really, going even, a lot further. But which is great, and I think that's just that part of that process. And maybe, when we talk about the future, I guess we'll discuss that a little more. But it's a nice thing to get things. It's nice to get things in the light, and then we can see what we're doing.
Sure. Well, I think my journey to Reiki was, it's my own, and it's unique, but I didn't feel like I had a whole lot of support in the process of becoming a Reiki practitioner, or exploring my own connection to Reiki and what that could look like, and maybe having more of a roadmap for the transition between just studying Reiki because I was interested in it, to becoming, moving on beyond studentship of Reiki into, how do I bring it into my life? And then from there, bringing it on even further on as a practitioner. I felt very intuitively called to Reiki. I do, in my heart, feel like Reiki called to me. And, invited me to step in as in a form of leadership and to become a Reiki practitioner. But the unfolding of that was incredibly intense. And it was a deeply spiritual process that I don't think I had a whole lot of support with. And in fact, a lot of it was like, I just kind of closed the door to my apartment and spent months healing myself using Reiki as a tool. And in many ways, like, felt very disconnected from friends and family during a really painful period of time in my life. And really what came out of that and what emerged from that is this precious connection between me and Reiki. The forms of support that were most meaningful for me in that time were familial support and the support of my family, and that they just had my back unconditionally and, you know, held me and supported me in a really tumultuous, like, emotional and spiritual time, was deeply meaningful to me. And after I was able to, like, really step back in to my life again after going through such an intense healing experience, I also really leaned into the support of both Reiki, a daily Reiki practice, and a movement therapy. So I found that, like, yoga was just so helpful for me to ground my energy, to find my body, connect to my body, and help with my own mental state. And really from that, after I started to become a Reiki practitioner, it was a whole period of time that it took me to become a Reiki practitioner. But like I said, I felt this deep calling in my soul to become that. And then I started to really receive a lot of more support from my clients as well. So their deeply personal and meaningful connection to Reiki and the healing that they received through treatments and sessions really kept me going. And I realized, like, how important that Reiki connection was for me in my own journey and in my own healing. And that I was able to provide that to others was just, like, really, really powerful for me. And so I think for maybe, I would say, about, like, the first 7 years of me being a practitioner, I don't really feel like a whole lot of societal support, I should say, around being a Reiki practitioner, not at all. And I really, in that time, leaned into my own intuition. Of course, I leaned into Reiki, and my clients, of course, as well. But then also, throughout my journey, my family very much supported me. And at one point, my dad paid for me to study Reiki from a new teacher, and that was also incredibly meaningful for me. And to be able to lean into a teacher who knew what he was talking about and could, like, shed some of the mysticism of Reiki for me, and provide me some more factual information or more factual information about Reiki was, just incredibly powerful for me. And it just rooted in a greater sense of confidence in my own growth. And so I think that the importance of finding the right teacher is, like, so pivotal for anybody on their Reiki journey, and finding a teacher that really you resonate with, but also can be somewhat a resource that you can lean into for, whether it be for information or for sharing healing or continuing study of Reiki. I think all of those things have been really meaningful to me. And lately, I think in the last few years, it just seems like there's been really a beautiful outgrowth of community within Reiki practitioners, which is something that I didn't really experience for the majority of, like, maybe, let's say, the first 7 to 8 years of me working as a Reiki practitioner. And so I think community is also a really meaningful form of support. And it's so important to talk with like-minded individuals or people who are on the same journey, on the same path as you, and who have dealt with, similar obstacles and challenges. I think for me, for a long period of time, I felt really isolated with my problems. There wasn't a whole lot of people I could share them with, or who could understand my journey as much as they understood their own. And so I think community is just that huge form of support that I hope that more Reiki practitioners and more Reiki women can lean into community as one way of being true to their way and following their calling as it pertains to Reiki.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as I'm listening to you, Carrie, and thinking about Bronwen, what you just shared, I was thinking like, what piece of like my personal support do I want to share about? And Bronwen, when you talked about like coming out of the closet as a Reiki person, right? Like being bold to like be that in public, declare that that's what we are. And then Carrie, as you were talking about that transition between like the period of time when your Reiki practice was for yourself, for your own process, your own healing development, and then kind of that transition to, okay, now I want to take this out into the world, make this more part of what I do and what I am. And help me kind of figure out where I wanted to land, which is really in that same space of that transition from that personal work where I did have a really teacher I connected with strongly who had built a really strong community around the Reiki practice. And that was like, it felt easy, right? Which was good because that was a period where nothing in my life felt easy. And so it felt very easy to step into that community and to choose it. But turning to wanting to do Reiki, more as an expression of my vocation, and how I was going to make a living and how I was going to share with the world and contribute. There was this whole other, like there was confusion for me about that, about where the support was going to come from. And did that mean that I was going to need to step away from communities that had been important to me to be in this Reiki community, right? It felt like there was this division between, my former community and where I maybe was going. And I shared in our last conversation about leadership that, where that community had been was in the realm of higher education, social justice development. I had a vast network of people and organizations kind of in those realms, having worked there for so long. And I didn't want to turn away from that, right? But I felt this conflict between that world and this other world that I was being pulled to. And the conflict in a certain sense felt artificial. It felt like they shouldn't have to be separate. And yet it felt like it was. And so when I think about what was the support that helped me transition eventually to where I am, more and more living now, not perfectly, but more and more I'm living in this space of those worlds coming together. It's required me to, do, as you said, Bronwen, like name who and what I am, but not just in the places where that feels safe, not just in the places where people are all choosing to be Reiki practitioners or, be in that world, but choosing to say, this is who I am. This is my contribution. This is what I have to offer in social justice spaces, in higher education spaces, in nonprofit spaces. And that felt impossible for a really long time. And so when I think about what's the support that's helped me get there, there's a particular moment that is just so important in my personal history with this. And that was in graduate school, where I knew I needed to go to grad school, and I had this choice to make. It was right in this time period where I was starting to think about Reiki as something I wanted to do. And I was like, do I go to school to further the social justice education and higher ed, work that I've been doing? Or do I just pivot entirely and do arts and consciousness, or, something that would be more aligned with being a Reiki practitioner and various other modalities that I work in. And I chose what felt like the safer route, stay, go to a school where you already have connections, where they're already trying to recruit you to do the work that you've been doing for all of this time. That matters, right? That was meaningful to me. And it felt like this, fork in the road. I'm going to make this choice, which means I'm turning away from this choice, which felt really painful. And I remember sitting in one of my first seminars with this small cohort of people that I went through grad school with, and kind of just voicing this conflict, this feeling of having to choose and not feeling supported to be myself in either realm, right? It was in either one of these spaces, I can't be my true self. I can't be true to my way and my being in either of these spaces because I have to choose. And I didn't have that language for it at the time, but that was what I was trying to articulate. And I'm, in this room of people who are studying to be, who are devoting their careers and already have for a long time to furthering social justice leadership in the world and all of these different areas, who are very much about the doing of that work. They're very much about the like making change in the world in different, different types of areas of society. And it felt very vulnerable to say like, God, I feel like I'm meant to just like work with people's inner spaces and like do this spiritual work and this like healing work. And, but I don't want to turn away from this important work that, we're all doing here. And there's this like silence that came into the room. And they said, one person in particular said, why do you think those are two different things? Why do you think you have to choose? Like, don't you think we need, spiritual healing support to do this work? Like, how many of us are out there just like wrecked in our spirit and our minds and our hearts because we don't have that kind of support, right? Like, no, we don't need you to go leave social justice spaces and go take this work to some, little enclave over here of people who already know about that stuff. Like, we need you to be bold and bring this here. And it was like, it was, I didn't put the word support on it at the time, but in this conversation, it's like, that was the support that I needed to be true to my way and my being as I walked this path, and to like break this dualistic mindset that I had been in, that I had to be one or the other, and that it wasn't safe or right or appropriate to be both at the same time. And really, I was just afraid. I was afraid of being looked at as being a weirdo and like, being woo-woo and being all these things that, there was, critiques about in spaces that I was in. And I really needed somebody who I respected, right? And the woman who said this to me she was a former police officer, very well known in, areas around sex trafficking work, and like is now just hugely well known in a wide range of areas. And like, I have so much respect for this woman. Like the kind of person that I always wished I could be, but like am not, And she's like, I need you to do this work, right? I need you to. And then she backed that up, after we graduated, she hired me to coach her for 6 months, right? As she was making her own transition out of police work and into other types of work. And so that form of support of not just acknowledging, right? We need you to figure out how to bring these things together. It is not right to be separating those things, right? Figure it out. And then to back that up by hiring me, right? Like saying, hey, I do actually need you to come and do this with me, was just a huge form of support. And ever since then, there have been these moments and there have been these people and organizations that have named that have said, hey, come do that with us, right? Whatever that is that you're doing, I don't exactly understand it, but I think we need it. So how can we work together? And, it's brought me to a place now where I'm feeling much more bold to be the one who like puts it out there, not just wait for those people that come to me, but to say, hey, this is something that's valuable in spaces where people are doing really, really difficult doing work, right? Like, let's tend to your being, right? In some ways that maybe feel a little different than what is normally done in these spaces, but that are valuable. So I just wanted to name that support and just, name that sometimes the value of just affirming what you see in somebody else and the value that you see in what they're trying to do can absolutely change their life. Because that's what that group of people did for me.
Yeah. No, I hear what you're saying. And actually, I think a lot of people that you talk to who practice the system of Reiki feel quite shy or whatever it is to say to people, this is what I do. And I think that, often in classes, it's the discussion that we have. How do you maybe we should keep that for another discussion, because it's a really good one too. How do you talk about what you do, and how do you do it from a place of feeling confident and being able to bring across the ideas of the practice in an easy way? Yeah,
it's a huge question. It's one that I've talked about in a lot of spaces. Yeah, how do you talk about this kind of work in spaces where people aren't already bought in and feel really strong and centered in that? I often joke that like half of my job is being weird in public, And like, and a lot of that is like, finding those through lines, those points of connection between what I know Reiki to be and what the other person values, right? What's important to
That's
them.
right. I think it's different with everybody you talk to. But I think looking at, for example, the growth of meditation, just that term, or mindfulness, so there's terminologies that have definitely evolved since I've been practicing, and that have become much, much more accepted. I mean, even Carrie, if you look at yoga, there was a time where yoga, I remember seeing there's an old Faulty, do you know the TV show Faulty Towers? It's a British show. Anyway, oh, God, guys. Anyway, so I'm showing my age here, but
we're just uncultured.
Anyway, it's an old TV show, British show with John Cleese in it. And it must be, oh God, I don't even know. It's probably from the 70s, something like that. And, or maybe late 70s. And, they have this Australian woman who comes in and she's a yoga teacher, and just the whole, cliche of what that is. And I always think that's when I think of like what people used to think yoga teachers are, that's what I always think of. Right. And, so, that has changed. And now I think like 90% of students are yoga teachers, who practice the system of Reiki. So, there's a lot of commonality between these things, but there's yoga is in all its different styles and varieties, that there's something there for everyone, sort of thing, incredibly popular. So if we see the growth of these things, I think that's a support for the system of Reiki itself as well, because there is, as you've both said, like this interconnection between different practices and how we imagine, how people in society, our culture imagines these things to be. So the system of Reiki is more accepted than it would have been 20 years ago. But it still has a long way to go, and we were going to talk about the future at some point. But just coming back to that, I was thinking about what was a spiritual support for me, and I would say that would be the actual experiences themselves, which is sort of what you were saying, Michaela, I think as well, that how what we're going through. And also, Carrie, you were saying that when you at the beginning, you just put yourself away, and experienced it, that experiences that we have are the things that keep us going. And I know that every time that I do a treatment, for example, I love that joy of that. And it is the moment of beginning is always this, brings me into this thing of I'm with someone here, we're sharing this space, that sort of thing is just, I find that a wonderful experience, and very encouraging, and a very big reminder about where the system of Reiki could take me. And I think it's different, being with others as well than being on your own. So self-practice is a different type of practice, and that's something that requires a commitment, and it's something that I think is this personal challenge for me anyway, that is ongoing, and sticking with it, not sticking with it, sticking with it, those sorts of things. So being with others, I find is often a great encouragement, and something that really keeps me going spiritually, and it's really nourishing. And yeah,
I love what you're speaking to, is just like this feeling of being supported by Reiki to do Reiki. And I had that same experience today. I worked with 3 different clients, and I was just, it's always so interesting is one of the challenges I think about being a Reiki practitioner is that there's this really general sense that Reiki can help with anything and everything, right? And that is in some ways nice, but as a practitioner, it's actually quite challenging, because you don't develop any expertise in a certain area. So like if you were a therapist, for example, you might develop a certain expertise working with children or sexual abuse, or, you create a whole amount of professional etiquette around a certain topic. And within Reiki, I think that that's somewhat challenging, although that's one thing that I would look forward for the future of Reiki is that Reiki practitioners get more of a meaningful understanding of their scope of practice and who they want to work with and why, and really develop more skills to help people with certain issues in their life. But nevertheless, but coming back to it, it was just like, I have these, 3 totally diverse clients. I have never met them, some of them before. And yet when I step into that space within Reiki, I'm spiritually ready to work with them. And that's because I've checked in with myself and my intuition has guided me. And I've had some insights throughout the day or through the week that made me feel very prepared to support them in that moment. And so I don't know, it's just something that's really, it feels a little bit sometimes unsettling because it's working directly so much with Reiki. And I think that's unique to a lot of other different healing modalities. But nevertheless, like that support feels very palpable.
Yeah, I agree. I think on a personal level, I think you talked about, your family supporting you, Carrie. I don't know, it is a difficult one, I think, on a personal level for people. I think that's wonderful that your family support you. I notice a lot of people talk to me about, when they're like someone who might do a class and they'll say, oh, my partner doesn't want me to be here or doesn't understand, or, that sort of thing. I think that can be incredibly difficult, obviously, especially because of that thing that I was saying before about, the system of Reiki still isn't there as a popular modality, in the sense that it's something that people just think, oh, I'm going to go and do this. I think, there's a certain niche still of people that are attracted to it. So it is a little bit different. But for myself personally, well, when I first started, I started with my then husband. So that was a really lovely thing, to have that, because you have 2 people doing the same thing. And I always thought that was really special. And whenever I have like partners in classes or things like that, I think, oh, you guys are so lucky, because you're both sort of starting from the 0 point together in a learning thing, something that you can learn and grow together with. Yeah. And something like this, which is then, covers so many aspects of your life and growth. That's a really beautiful thing. Yeah. I mean, as an individual, though, I think, I don't know, I guess I've always felt still quite, I felt quite alone. I'm, in many ways with the system of Reiki and moving forward as a person, running their own business. And I'm sure you have all feel that in your own ways. That when I do, I work for myself now. So, that there isn't another person there to bounce those things off. And I think for me, I'm a much more we person than an I person. So yeah. But, I would like a we, in that sense. It's beautiful to be able to talk about things. And that's why it's lovely to do something like this. It's lovely to be able to share things to, and yeah, I miss that. And I think that is something, that type of support is something that I think is really special, if you can have that sort of that close support business wise. Yeah, but I don't really have that. And I guess then, we need to look to other areas to find that.
Yeah, I really want to affirm that in a couple of different ways. I have a co-teacher and he and I were, life partners for 7 years, and got into teaching Reiki together. We each had our personal self-practice prior to that. But when we stepped into teaching, it was as a team. And there was something amazing about having a partner in the work, right? Whether they're, whatever type of partner they might be in other areas of life, to have a teaching partner. And I would just, for people thinking about moving into teaching Reiki in particular, or who are doing so alone, to really consider whether there's folks in your life that you can collaborate with to co-teach. Because it's been hugely supportive to have that other person, not just to share the work of developing curriculum and, doing the actual teaching, but the spiritual support of having somebody who understands, who's like at the same place, working a similar pace with different interest areas. He and I have very different personal practices and relationships with the system of Reiki, but there's tons and tons of overlap. And we've developed our curriculum together. And then just the logistical support of having another person, in an intense class, right? Knowing that if I need to, step out, or if a student needs one-on-one support, that there's somebody else to, keep the class moving, like just those types of logistics. And then the way in which it's allowed me to be more bold in how I think about it. So we're in a process right now, Joe and I, of transitioning from the weekend class model, which is very common, to an 8-week class model, and then also to creating a year-long program that kind of encapsulates all of the Reiki classes and special topics and one-on-one support. And I don't know if I would just have the energy and the bravery to make those changes and to create that larger container if I didn't know that there was somebody else there doing it with me, both for the creative support and the logistical support. So I'll just say thank you to Joe, my co-teacher, for, really walking this journey with me and emboldening me, right, and supporting me in stepping into this. And it's like, we're not business partners, like he's not part of the business in that way, but when it comes to the teaching of this material and the cultivating it, not just as a business, but as a lifestyle, as a way of life, it's been hugely impactful to have someone walking that path alongside.
That's beautiful, Michaela. And you're very lucky in that sense. Yeah. Because that's what I was just thinking about, this thing of checking in. Sorry, Carrie, I'm taking over your space.
No,
here.
go for it.
But I was just thinking, the checking in thing of having someone there to go, hey, what you just did, that wasn't really appropriate, or whatever, because that's a scary thing to say to someone, or to have someone say to you, right? But to have that, I think, is incredibly important as a teacher in a field like this. And when you're on your own, I think it's very easy to think, I just do this, or why don't I just, and you start deviating and deviate. And where do you end up? Right. So to bring it back, and to really to have someone that you are, how do you say that? What am I trying, I can't think of the word, that you have to,
well, there's like an accountability piece.
Accountability is the word.
Yeah. I mean, Joe and I have definitely checked each other, like, and asked for it, like, hey, when I did this in class or said this in class, did that feel off? Did that feel, inappropriate or too much, or, whatever. Or, hey, I think that the way that you took that particular, moment in class, really took us off track. And, let's talk about how to do that differently. Being able to have those accountability conversations is essential really, if you're going to work with somebody else, and to have the mutual respect necessary to do that well.
Yeah. I think it keeps you in integrity, right? It's like a form of integrity too, is to have somebody else there. You can't just go off on a tangent and start speaking to something that maybe is, you can, but hopefully can help kind of rein that in. But I totally resonate with what you were saying, Bronwen, too, is just that, primarily working for myself and working one-to-one with individuals and, running a business at the same time. It is very isolating there. And, it's nice to have familial support, but I certainly don't talk to my dad about my marketing copy or or even my husband for that matter, because, there's just only so much that, and sometimes I do let him in and ask for his advice. And usually I get some really good advice, but a lot of times it's like, totally, don't change this, do it this way, like move it that way. And I'm like, no, I can't, I'm sorry. So I have to be very careful who I let in and offer me advice. But that's why I say, I think it's so important for Reiki women and Reiki practitioners, not to engender it, but it's for us to form collaborative systems of support. And if we could transition that into really the next part of the question is, what forms of support do you feel like are most meaningful for you going forward, or maybe for the practice of Reiki going forward? I think working together and collaborating is an amazing way to, take away some of the isolation we feel as practitioners and then to create accountability, to share the workload of what it might be to launch a program or a training. And then also you get that community support and a support for somebody who does a similar type of work. It has the same depth of knowledge as you do, more than likely, or a complementary depth of knowledge. And I know for myself that, I think, and Michaela was speaking to it as well, is that Reiki is so broad and so many different and interesting ways it can be applied, but it is so much about bringing us back into wholeness, right? So it's important when we look at especially our professional life, to not try. I think that Reiki has been the tool that helped me bring different aspects of my professional life together. I love nature and my master's degree in environmental science, and as well as my yoga teaching. And I think that there's respectful ways that we can bring these different aspects, or different professional training together. There's probably some problematic ways that we bring it together as well. But for most people, I think on a Reiki path are multi-talented individuals. And I think of each of you as very multi-talented. Bronwen with her writing, and even though you've just been such a light in the Reiki community for so long, there's a deeper level to you than just Reiki. And so that's what I encourage a lot of Reiki practitioners to do, is to develop, their calling. And it might use different tools. And ultimately, the big aha that I've had in the last, maybe year or so, is to develop my practice. And my practice is all the tools that I have that I've developed over the years. I can use them in meaningful ways to support my clients and to support myself financially.
Yeah. And
that they can be used. And I'm really grateful that I've been a yoga teacher along with being a Reiki practitioner, because in my path and my development, I probably couldn't have made a living solely as a Reiki practitioner. It's incredibly challenging, I think, to solely create a living as a Reiki practitioner. It might be something that grows over time, but I think it's a 10-year project ultimately. If I look back at my growth through my career, I think it takes a lot of time to build that many connections with clients, and have kind of a rolling Rolodex of incoming students in my trainings. So I feel really supported by having different ways that I show up professionally, but they actually support each other. So there's ways I can really meaningfully support my yoga students, but I think that they also want that spiritual support. So there's these one-to-one ways I can work with them as well. And so that's my encouragement for those of us on the Reiki path, is just to continue to develop your talents and create a scope of practice that feels really in alignment with your gifts. And I think that's a really powerful way to show up, both personally and professionally, for others.
Yeah, when I think about this question of, what support would I encourage us to develop moving forward as we build this next, cycle of Reiki history together collectively, it's really reiterating things we've already named, right? So I really encourage us to get more clear and concise about how we communicate so that we can make those bridges across difference, right? So that we're not just speaking to a small collection of people who are already predisposed to want to do Reiki, right? We want to build our fluency in other realms and really be able to articulate and understand where the practice of Reiki, where the lineages and the history of Reiki actually intersects really beautifully with a wide range of fields and a wide range of experiences that people are having. And to be, to be in our own practice enough that we can be bold in that we can kind of move aside whatever's in the way of us speaking directly to the contribution that we have. And that might look like, as Carrie, you were saying, developing more of a focus, right? And to kind of shift away from this idea that, my Reiki practice is for everybody and start thinking like, who specifically am I best suited to support in my Reiki practice? And to be clear about that, right? It might be birthing people, people who are going through pregnancy, right? I spent a period of time really explicitly focusing on that realm. Like that is the person that I want to help. It might be people who are doing really intense work, like medical professionals who need more of this kind of support. So it's like fine-tuning those bridges between us as Reiki practitioners and the web of life and the web of culture that's around us, and being really clear about why Reiki should be in those spaces, right? And that might mean taking on language that feels a little different and really finding these points of commonality. For me, that often means getting much more pragmatic in my speech about Reiki. I tend to speak very esoterically, very metaphorically, right? And I always have to remind myself, why does this matter for my day-to-day life? What does this have to do with my clients' day-to-day lived experience? Why does this even matter? Right? Why does all this esoteric stuff matter when it comes to them living their life better? And those kinds of grounding questions have really helped me to make these bridges. So I really encourage us as a community to do that work and refining our message about this and finding people inside of other spaces that are not Reiki spaces that are intrigued or that get it or that are predisposed to open up that space to us. Because we are needed there, right? But those doors aren't going to necessarily open for us without that bridging work.
Yeah. No, I think that's beautiful. The idea that, a lot of people have come from other professions before moving into the system of Reiki and using that, that thing of everything coming together in your life and not having these separate, you were talking about that, Michaela, earlier, yeah, but not having these like little separate boxes and just allowing the system of Reiki to flow into everything and to especially into the things that you have loved in your life and the things that mean something to you and let it be there in the best way that it possibly can. And that might be as a coach or a teacher or a practitioner, whatever it is. But if you want to work in the system of Reiki, there are so many possible ways of doing that. Absolutely. Yeah, it's beautiful. Okay, I think we might be wrapping it up for today.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. And I hope it spurs a lot of meaningful thoughts about where you want to take Reiki in the next 100 years for all of our listeners and being a part of that movement. And until next time, bye. Love you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so
Bye.